Are we on? Great. Oh, we're alive. Live from Hollis, Brookline. It's Wednesday night. Okay. I'm Molly Babcock. I'm calling the Hollis Brookline Cooperative School Board meeting to order at 6 o'clock p.m. on Wednesday, September 16th. At this point, I'd like to appoint a process observer. And since there's only 4 of you, someone needs to, Beth will do it. Thank you, Beth. Agenda adjustments.
Yes, in your packet, we have the presentation by Rick tonight on class rank. We also have the policy in there. We didn't put it under deliberations because it's the first time it's coming to the board, and we typically want to give the community in that time to digest that. But if the board wanted to change that action and do a first reading or something, they would have to do a motion. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And then the second thing I would ask the board, if we could add a discussion item for SAT testing. We will be giving the SAT testing in school as we traditionally do. When we sat down to start doing the needed staffing and spacing, it kind of creates a problem with the social distancing. So we just want to have a discussion on that so the board would be aware of what we're thinking around that day.
Okay, so do we feel like it's necessary to put the class rank under deliberations and bring it up for first reading, the policy, or should we just talk about it and then go over it in policy committee?
I think.
Go ahead, Krista.
No, I think we can talk about it and then take it back to the budget committee.
Not the policy committee. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think the budget committee would care. And take it back to the policy committee and then bring it back for a first reading.
Okay. I think that, does that make sense?
Yeah, I was going to say with the time frame of implementing it, we have some time.
We have some time, yeah. And there's also, we don't have to do 3 readings on it. We could do a waiver reading or whatever, so, okay. So we're not gonna add that under deliberations at this point, but we will touch on it after your discussion, after your presentation. Okay, any other, is that it? We're good on that? Okay, so nominations, resignations, and correspondence.
I have a variety of information tonight. The first is I just want to let you know that our high school French teacher, Mrs. McCormick, will be taking a leave in February as they plan to welcome their second child. So that's just an informational piece, and we wish them the best. Second, Gina had passed out a calendar. This is the calendar for school board dates as we try to get back on a more normal schedule so everybody can kind of plan going forward. I also received a letter from the HESA Union, which I'll read into the record. It says, "Dear Chairperson Babcock, this letter is to inform you that the Hollis Education Support Staff desires to bargain a master contract for the year beginning 2021. This notification is in accordance with the requirements of RSA 273-A:3. And we can contact Ann Robinson. Ann is the lead secretary at the Hollis Primary School, and she's the acting president for the union. And this is just a standard letter to notify the board that they would like to enter into negotiations, which we've already done with the teachers union.
So she's replacing Chuck?
Yes. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Next, I had emailed you an update. I received it sometime Tuesday from the members of the community that were working on the resolution for non-discrimination and the equity initiative. And we have that on a topic later tonight, but I'd just like to read you for the public what was provided to me. It says, whereas the district is committed to non-discrimination, whereas Hollis Brookline is an inclusive community, whereas the district recognizes the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion affect all members of the Hollis Brookline community regardless of their background. Whereas many institutions of learning within the state of New Hampshire have developed policies regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion, and whereas the current COVID-19 pandemic may bring unique challenges related to that are yet to be examined. Therefore, may it be resolved that the SAU 41 school districts will make diversity, equity, and inclusion a strategic priority by actively supporting such efforts. And 2, SAU 41 will review its policies and procedures relative to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and release a plan to address its findings. These actions may include professional development, drafting new or editing existing policies, programs and procedures, and a curriculum review. So that was received the other day, and when we talk a little later on about our agenda item, I'll go through the committee that I've formed and kind of give you some highlights on that. Also, I handed out, unfortunately, Cindy Van Conant wasn't able to be here tonight, unexpectedly, but she did type up a summary of the last 3 budget committee meetings. There are 2 main points that we're going to touch on when we go through our discussions later. So if you see anything else as you review it, I'd be happy to try to answer that for you. And that's, I think, it at this time for correspondence.
Great.
Oh, one more. I just want to publicly thank Michelle DeVoe. They made a donation for PPE to help offset the costs that the district is incurring. They did that for the SAU, and I just want to thank them publicly for their generous gift.
Thank you. Wow. That is incredibly generous of them. Thank you. Hey, are there any questions? No? All right. So at this point, I'm going to introduce public input. So public input's an opportunity for the public to comment on a specific agenda item. We accept public comment during the public input portion of the meeting. Once the chair has opened the floor for public input, we need you to state your name and address, address your statements to the board chair, and keep your comments directed towards items on the agenda. It's not a time for questions and answers. It's just an opportunity for us to hear your comments. And we ask that you keep your comments to 2 minutes and that you be respectful. At this point, I'd like to open the floor for public input.
Hello, Tiffany Testo, 101 Moore Hill Road. I actually have public input on 2 items, so I'm wondering, do I get 2 minutes per item?
So 2 minutes per item is fine, Tiffany.
Okay.
I'll go with that because
Okay.
there's
So,
only 4 of you here.
The first thing I want to talk about is top 10. That is on the agenda for tonight, and it seems like forever ago since we worked on the top 10, and that was a subcommittee formed under a steering committee that was looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion and sort of all of the different realms in the district. Actually, no, I think the high school, correct me if I'm wrong. But the goal was to create a community of learners that was more equitable, diverse, and inclusive. Anyhow, I was on the subcommittee of top 10, and I want to talk about the process. I want to tell the board a little bit about my confidence in the process. I'll be really honest that I am an educator of over 25 years, and equity is kind of the focus. I've kind of been focused on reform, educational reform, and alternative education that really looks at equity. So I went into this subcommittee pretty clear on what the research was out there and what it said in terms of not only GPAs, but that's another thing, but top 10. And so I said, I was very clear up front, I said, I don't know how I can serve on this committee because I'm pretty convinced, but what I was most impressed with is the process that the committee took. It was a very inquiry-based, data-driven process that in the end brought us to a conclusion that I was hoping we would come to, but with all sorts of evidence that was backed up. And we asked really good questions, the committee asked really good questions and thought about ways to seek the data and looked for the data. And Teresa Risdal, who was chair of guidance at the time, I believe, she did an amazing job of pulling all sorts of stuff in terms of looking at how it would affect those kids that were in the top 10. So I just want the board to know that I have pure confidence in the process. Okay,
Great.
thank you.
So that was top 10. Terrific. Is there any other public comment?
On that?
Not on that.
Okay.
We don't take them in a specific order, so if you'd like to
Sure.
join us,
Did you
that's
wanna
great.
go
And
again,
then
Tiff, or you want
Tiff
me to
can
go
go
ahead?
again.
I don't care.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, Brooke Arthur, 74 Ridge Road. I'm gonna read my notes to keep myself on track here. I know that we are an excellent school district. I am very grateful that my children have the opportunity to learn and grow here. Part of that excellence is continuing to evolve when there are paradigm shifts. We are a tolerant community, but we can move beyond the bar of tolerance. This begins with educating ourselves as to where the gaps are. As Maya Angelou states, do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better. My vision, which I affirm is an achievable goal, is that not only for the students and families currently in our school community, but also for those prospective students and families in our future, whatever their race, religion, ability, sexual orientation, or gender identification, however they uniquely manifest as human, that they can trust that they will feel safe, respected, welcomed, and valued here. That both on paper and in practice, our school community proves itself to prioritize equity and inclusion for all. Therefore, it is essential that the Superintendent Advisory Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion be guided, facilitated by an individual with DEI credentials. It cannot be solely left to community opinions. We need to rely on fact, science, and research to do this work properly. And the committee needs to be supported by the boards through either perhaps the previously presented resolution or some amended version of such, or some other affirmation of board action. I am here as a community member seeking 1, clear, direct explanation of the credentials or reasoning used for the selection of advisory committee members, and 2, clear, direct explanation of the intent for the formation of this committee. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. One more? Two?
Hi, Tiffany again, 101 Moore Hill Road. Brooke had a very well-formed statement. I just met my students for the first time today, some of my advisees. We had half-hour family meetings, so I'm not clearly as organized in my thoughts. But I do want to speak to the other agenda item, which I believe Andy's going to speak on in terms of some equity work. One of the things that I want to bring to, I guess, recognition, and it's hard to say this because I don't want to be critical, but I'm going to be critical. I'm disappointed because I think that this work, the work of SEL and DEI, is in the world of education known as the absolute fundamental bedrock of how kids learn. So we're in a pandemic. You guys all just went through the first week. We're going through a lot of stress. And everything I'm learning and doing and working towards is knowing that that's essential. It's not enrichment, it's not the soft skills, it is absolutely essential in terms of trauma-informed and brain-based education of how kids learn. And so it is time for us to do better. It's funny, she used that Maya Angelou quote, and I'm friends with Brooke, and I said, you can't use that. That's been my mantra. That's been my mantra for getting through COVID. We're gonna do the best we can until we know better, and when we know better, we're gonna do better for our kids, right? And so, we know better. I know our district knows better. And there are so many side roads. There are so many challenges. But I am one who believes not only in intent, but in action. And I really want us to act now, to do better. I have many anecdotal evidence stories of kids that have done amazing coming back. They love it, they love it. And I've also had some where it's been extremely stressful. And if they had had that one person in school that they knew well, if they had had some SEL stuff in their classes, oh man, it would have made the difference. And I got one of them at home. So it's also personal. But I'm an educator, and so I'm thinking about all our kids. This isn't coming from my own personal perspective. This is coming from thinking about every single kid. Not the top 10%, not the majority, every single kid. That's all I'm saying. I want us to do the work now. It is time. It is time. And I wish we had done it in reopening more than we did, but I get it. It's hard. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Anyone else? Any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, I will now close the floor for public input, and we can move on to, and thank you for your thoughtful public input, both of you. Principals reports. So let's start with Principal Grisone.
All right.
Athletic update.
Thank you, Holly. As all of us experienced this last week, getting back to school has been pretty much everything. Great, challenging, everything in between. We welcomed our 7th graders back for an orientation day on September 8th, and then all 7th and 8th graders on the 9th. And we're also up and running with both in-person and remote platforms, Zoom in the Room. And as expected, it comes with many challenges, but nonetheless, I am extremely proud of the work that our staff has done to get to where we are here today, and continue to evolve and improve on a daily basis. As indicated, our arrival and dismissal procedures, if you've been part of the middle school / high school carpool line, it has gone as well as I think could go up to this point. We continue to tweak and change and improve upon our processes, but overall I think everything considered with our numbers where they are for carpooling, I think we're doing pretty well. Our overall enrollment numbers are included in this month's report, and just highlighting a quick little stat here. We have about 388 as of September 9th, and that may have fluctuated 1 or 2 in one direction, with 78% overall in person and 22% remote. And we have open house coming up, which will be done virtually via Zoom next week. 7th grade will be on the Tuesday the 22nd, and 8th grade will be on Thursday the 24th.
Great, thank you.
And I'm welcome to any questions.
Sports started too, right?
Yep, sports started yesterday. They're running, as we discussed at last meeting, intramural based. There will not be interscholastic competition, just in-house practices and scrimmages, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday after school. And our numbers have never been as healthy as they are. We had, I think as of today, it was 133 participants, and we welcome some students who are learning remotely also to take part, and everything up to this point has gone off really well. We're working again to refine some of our pickup procedures after sports release at 4 o'clock, and outside of that, it was just great to see the kids back out on the fields and in the gym with volleyball, and yeah, like I said, our numbers have never been so healthy.
Terrific. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any questions?
Let me ask just a general question, and I know it's throwing it out there, but what's the mood in the school with everyone coming back? How is it tense? Is it happy? Is it?
Yeah, I'll say, and I said it in my newsletter last week, I'm just super impressed with, first, the students, their cooperation with what is an entirely new world that we as adults know the challenges that exist in navigating all of this new stuff. And I have to say, the kids just seem very resilient with things. They're just kind of taking things in stride, and it makes me proud to think, the work that not only our staff has done, up to this point K-6 and pre-K-6, and our parents and the community, but the kids are really, really responding well to what is just a totally different world in my perspective. They seem to think, they're just happy to be back and seeing their friends, and the teachers are doing a phenomenal job with a new world here too, and I think that the vibe is that we are up against a lot of challenges, and everyone is taking one day at a time and doing their best they can to make the best of what is just uncharted territories.
That's great to hear. Any other questions?
I have a couple generalized questions, so I'm going to wait until.
Okay. I have a couple for you, Tim. Just, are you seeing or sensing kids, families wanting to change their mode? Is that what we call it?
The enrollment status?
Enrollment status, yeah.
Yes, on an individual basis. I wouldn't say the masses. We're handling those on a case-by-case basis with some moves being easier than others, meaning those who are choosing to go, who are in person and are choosing to go remote for different reasons. That's an easier move. We're not at this point able to really manage at this point in time requests to come from remote to in person, and I think maybe that'll be a district-wide date down the road. That
I was just wondering if you were feeling the pressure as middle schoolers are, and I think families who come to the middle school for the first time, like it's all new, and middle schoolers tend to.
I think at this point, a weekend, right? Yeah, a week or so in. I think it's manageable at the moment. I haven't seen a huge influx or a large number of people looking to move.
Great, thank you. I don't know who to say this to, but just to make a note, it would be really great if the board members were included on the newsletters and emails that go from the middle school and the high school. And I think I've had a board member ask for that before. I don't know why it doesn't happen. I don't know, because some of us aren't parents at certain schools, and so your newsletters and the information you send out really help me as a board member, because I'm a parent at the high school, but I don't get the middle school newsletter. And our board reports are great, but I don't know if that's possible. But it would be great if our emails could be, because some of us don't have kids in the school at all, so it just would be great.
I'm getting the high school ones, so Rick knows how to do it.
Yeah. Okay.
I know someone who knows how to do it. Let's put it that way.
I don't think Krista, I don't know if you're getting the high school ones.
Oh, you're not? Okay, I'll have
And
to
I
put you
know
back. I'll have to put you in that
Cindy
group.
wouldn't be,
Yeah.
And
yeah.
then I wouldn't get middle school, and the same people wouldn't get middle school, because some people have graduated out completely, so.
Or some of us get them all.
Yeah, and some people get them all, so, yeah.
Used to get them all.
Yeah, so, okay. Just a note, I don't know how you do it, but it would be great if we could get that, because I think those things really help us kind of stay in tune, especially because people stop us in the grocery store and ask us questions from the newsletter, and we have no idea what's even going on. So it'd be great. Thank you. Okay, moving on to, if there are no other further questions about the middle school, I'm going to move on to Mr. Barnes.
Thank you. So yes, opening, I will say from my perspective, and I think from a lot of staff perspective, the opening went better than we thought it would. I always, I had high hopes and was thinking positively about it, but it's a big undertaking. So I think my response to it would be similar to my response to graduation. Pleasantly surprised. I shouldn't be, but I am. And so, the kids are, knock on wood, but the kids have been terrific. Even kids who I know in a pre-pandemic might have struggled with taking really direct direction have been awesome, across the board. Yep, it's still early, but for, 600 and some high school kids to come back in the first morning when I'm doing parking lot duty, they're all sitting in their cars because they read the newsletter. They knew they couldn't get out of their car. That doesn't happen like in a lot of other places. I knew it would, but I was like, I wonder if this is going to work. And it did. They did really well, and they're very responsive. And to get out and have their mask on and walk up to the building without even thinking about it, there was just a lot of appreciation for being back in recognition, like I put in my report, that, yeah, this is really different with the classes and the structure, but we're just kind of happy to be back. So, and in fact, that's been more, when we've had to do multiple reminders for people, we've explained to them, listen, everyone's watching. People drive by. If you're not wearing your mask, it's going to impact everybody. So that kind of understanding that this is a collective responsibility is there's a lot more awareness around that. And a lot of them, last thing is, I don't want to go remote, in some cases. So most of the kids are pretty happy to be back, knowing that things are different. And I think we're going to have some nice new traditions. Lunch on the lacrosse field in the fall is a really nice thing. It's kind of just a very relaxed kind of vibe, and kids can spread out and they're outdoors, and we've never really allowed that before. And now when I think about it, I'm like, why did we never allow that? Doesn't make any sense with all the space that we have. Like, we should have been doing this a long time ago. So those are kind of some of the silver linings, I think, in this. Dismissal on arrival has gone way better than I ever could have imagined, unless you're the last car in the carpool lane. But even so, it's with the staggering of things, it's certainly moving along more smoother than it has in the past. So we're pretty pleased with that. We'll continue to make tweaks. We're dealing with adolescents, and nobody's perfect, even the adults. So we'll continue to make adjustments as we go. Speaking of adjustments, I'll remind all my fellow principals who might be watching, and Mr. Grisone, to not use your personal Zoom account for open house night when you're delivering your address, because it only holds 100 people. So maybe use the schools so that you can have more than 100 people, because you definitely have more than 100 parents who want to watch it. But fortunately, that was brief. I got positive feedback from just the visitations with teachers, and I really have to commend staff. This is just the whole, we're grateful that having that PD time was huge, but to teach in the manner where I have 2 kids on Zoom, or in some cases 10, and then teach to my regular class and be able to do both, that's a really hard thing to do. And I know that just from running meetings and having to do it during the PD days. I made several mistakes of just walking away from my computer, like little things that you would do. And it's hard. And it's hard for kids too, but every day our kind of goal is just to get a little bit better than the day before. So if we can do a little bit better than we did the day before, then we're pretty happy with that. And if we're still in school, we're pretty happy with that too. Our numbers are similar to in terms of who's in remote and who's in person. That 80-20, you can see those are the latest numbers broken down by grade. And I think in terms of, maybe I'll anticipate one of your questions. I'm not seeing a ton of, I've gotten some requests to go remote, which is Principal Grisone has pointed out, a lot easier for us to accommodate. We do have a process for that we talk through and try to identify what the issue is. But we also have people wanting to come back too. And so people that I am allowing to go remote, after they go through our process, the discussion centers around, I may not be able to have you come back when you want to come back, or in the classes that you want to come back into because of the spacing issues in the class. And that's all gone really well. In addition to thanking the staff and the kids, parents have been phenomenal. I mean, across the board, super patient. Even when we've made mistakes, I'll go for our first dismissal of CAD block on Wednesday was interesting, and not something that we would have anticipated it going that way. And parents are really patient with that, and we had a much better one today. So, it's just lots of opportunity for growth. So we're pretty pleased with where we're at, and in terms of the mood or the tenor of the building. I would say kids are definitely happy to be back. It's almost kind of like business as usual, but I'm wearing a mask. And I would say staff are positive, but also cautious, because it's getting more acclimated to the environment. So every day's better and better. So we're pretty happy with where things stand, and just tomorrow will be a better day. So.
Great. Thanks, Rick.
Yep.
Do we have any questions on the principal's report? And then you're going to do Brian's report for him too, Rick. So we'll just do questions on the general opening of school first.
I have a couple, they were kind of umbrella over both.
Why don't you ask them now?
Okay.
Let's get them out of the way.
I was just curious, a couple questions. One, I was curious if everybody in the co-op that needs a device has a device at this point. And I was also had a supply question, but that, just in general, in the last months, we've all learned that prices have changed, ability to buy things and purchase things, supply and demand has changed. So I was just curious, so it's a two-part question. Do we have the supplies we need on campuses, and does everybody that needs a device have a device at this point, if they need loaners, things like that? I was just curious.
Sure. I'll take that question just because it kind of spans multiple districts.
Sure.
As you can imagine, we have over 300 devices on back order across the SAU, and then another 100 and some odd to be ordered. That being said, folks who requested a device prior to September 1st, which means they completed registration that had been due August 10th, were offered a device. Not everyone has picked them up. So now we're in the phase of calling them, do you really need this device? So we can release them back. We have a running list, and they're ready to go, and I believe the device pickup for phase 2 should begin this week, of those who requested a device from September, after September 1st. The issue was not a supply issue for the co-op, but an extreme supply issue for one of our elementary districts. And we also have a supply issue for our support staff who need devices. So we're trying to balance getting all the devices to the students who need them, but in an organized fashion, so we're not two people assigning a device to the same child. So that's why we had to delay and hope that our back-ordered devices came in on time, which would have been yesterday, and so they have not. But we will begin phase 2 this week.
Okay, and supplies too. I mean, we're kind of, but that was my main concern, but just in general. All right, thank you, because it's hard because right now with, whether you're remote and need it, you really need it, and if you're in person, you really need it. So I'm just seeing a little concern there. But.
Sure, and like I said, there are quite a few devices that have not been picked up that were reserved, so we've been calling and oftentimes leaving messages. So if, if you don't need a device and you reserve one, let us know so we can put that in the hands of someone who does need it.
Sure. I have one more kind of generalized question that might be more this direction too over the co-op. But I've mentioned in the past my concern or my wish to see and investigate what we could do for subs to have access, whether, like email access, login access, things like that, an ID. And I asked that for a lot of reasons. In the past, just because for security, be able to have names and identify people, especially now with masks and all that go on. But I'm noticing too, we're going to have so much more of an increase for subs, and I'm concerned with the room in Zoom, and when you cover, if that person covering is only going to be able to cover the students in person. Because that means the Zoom kiddos at home don't have a sub and don't have a teacher that day. And one day, it's just as in the spring, you have assignments and they're posted, and that's fine. But we have a pretty high anticipation for that. So I was curious, and I know there's so many things on your plate, but I really think having access to log in and have email. Email also allows the district to communicate such important policy or changes or things. So again, I know it sounds like a small thing, but to me it's a really big thing because remote students aren't going to have access to subs.
Sure. So our guaranteed subs are going to have access because we know that they're coming in every day. It's a little bit more difficult to manage those that might show up once or might complete the process and never sign on to take a job for just the daily sub. But the guaranteed sub, the intention is to complete that process. I have to tell you, we just found a first grade teacher yesterday for one of our schools. So we are processing a ton of employees every day, so many new hires. And with that is all the paperwork, all the logins, all the accounts. And, we're creating accounts every day and pushing it out. But it hasn't gotten to the guaranteed sub, and that is our intention.
Sure, and I'm so glad to hear that that's the intention for guaranteed sub, but I would also encourage, and I understand what you're saying, if you have a sub that subs once in the school year, it is not worth the time, the effort. You're not going to, get all the benefits from that, but you do have a fairly decent sub pool of people that sub on a very regular basis, and you're cutting off that ability to connect with remote students. You can't take attendance for them, you can't do any of that. So I really think it's something that I didn't ever think about, but it's something that now I'm starting to realize I think it's going to be a problem. But I get what you're saying. I just hope that maybe we can, once we have more of the staffing where we need it and the ability to, that maybe we can find a happy medium of if you're committed to be subbing, so many times per year that they really, I think it would benefit everybody to process that.
So That came up today, and I asked the question of our one of our secretaries who works with our subs, and they do have a sub account for the network and for Power School. The Google accounts are a separate entity, but they do have access to rosters for attendance purposes in Power School, and there's a generic sub account that they're issued the credentials for when they come in for everything that you were just describing, attendance purposes and whatnot.
So that allows for attendance to be taken with remote students, because if you're not Zooming, then you don't have access to. So I do understand, you know, all of the campuses, you know, every single campus has sub access to log in and to take attendance, but if you're not Zooming, you don't know who's attending.
Sure, and so I would say that there's a level of complexity with that, with the time at which we know about the absence. So if it's a last minute absence, we can't plan accordingly. If it's a planned absence, then absolutely we can account for those on Zoom and obtain the link. So.
Right, but if there's not a Zoom that's done, I'm saying, so someone else would do the Zoom if there's an absence? I don't know if I'm explaining my question.
So I mean,
yeah, I'm sorry.
There are a couple different scenarios, and I just wonder if we're getting in a little bit into the weeds.
but
No, that's fine. I anticipate it's going to be a problem. You know, you're not connecting with those remote
So why don't we
students.
just take a pause and, you know,
Yeah.
put a little note to maybe address some questions about how substitutes are gonna work, but in the next couple weeks, you know, we can bring that back, so. Okay, I had a question, actually. I don't wanna get into the weeds. It's come up on social media. It's really not Rick's principal's report, but it sort of is. There seems to be, I'm just saying this, there seems to be some confusion, and I don't need an answer on this. There seems to be some confusion in the community about when my student is absent and they just want to stay home. They don't feel good, but they didn't really fail, maybe they failed the daily symptom monitoring. They want to stay home, or they're just not feeling it, and they don't go to school, and then they Zoom in, and is that an absence, is that not? And we don't need to. I happened to see social media today. I had a question on it. Somebody asked me the question. So it just seems to be some clarity needs to be made on when can we Zoom in to a class and when not. You know?
So right now, it's something we're going to discuss at the high school as a leadership team, because it's just one of those things that you're kind of in the back of your head, but until you actually get into it, you start to realize. Without going into, like you say, getting into the weeds, the one constant is if you're an in-person student and you're not in school, you're going to be marked absent.
Okay.
If you choose to Zoom in for whatever reason or we allow it, which right now it's probably universally being allowed, because teachers, I think, in a lot of cases, it's just easier for them to give them the link or they already have it, then that's fine. But, you know, they're going to be marked absent because it's a safety piece. You are registered as in person. You are physically not there.
Right.
We have no grade penalty for absences, so it doesn't mean so many absences equals, you know, you're getting docked. That doesn't exist. So it's more about just the safety piece at this point.
Safety and tracking our students who we expect to be in the building.
Right.
I get it.
Right.
I get it.
Yep.
I just wanted a little clarity
Sure.
on that for the community, so that makes sense. Great. Any other questions? The mood in your building is pretty good, it sounds like, so.
I would say yes. Yep.
Great. Thank you. All right, at this point, we need the athletic update. That would be you, Brian Bumpus.
Sure. Same haircut. So Brian and Ron did a great job in really leading the state, not just the southern region, but I'll say leading the state in coming up with a plan, a plan for having some sort of competition. Practices kicked off on the 8th. You can see students out practicing now. There is some working on a regional schedule. There's a lot that goes into that. Everything changes every day, as we know, and the same in the world of athletics. So they're working on doing some sort of regional schedule that Brian's discussed here before with a good number of teams where there's a high degree of comfort with us playing one another. So we're pretty excited to be offering all of our athletics mostly, and much like the middle school, our participation at a minimum is where it has always been, regardless of a pandemic or not. The numbers are slightly lower, but we have a much smaller class that came on board, so that would make sense for them to be lower. And as has been discussed here many times, it's great to see the turf field out in the back with the light poles and coming along. I know that's a source of where I see several walks we have many people walking outside classes because we encourage them to go outdoors, and I know that's being utilized by teachers just as a space to go out and get outside and take off the mask. But it looks good, and we are looking forward to hosting games out there. And we have a number of recent coaching hires there in cross country at the high school, and as well as some coaching openings for boys lacrosse in particular, and tennis, boys and girls tennis. So a great job by those guys.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Great. Any questions on a high school athletics? Great. At this point, we're going to let you do your top 10 presentation, Mr. Barnes.
All right, just give me one moment here to set up. I think is the connector over there?
Tim, do you want to pull down the projector? I mean, the screen?
Lights you can? Oh, no, I can do them. I just, they're.
Tell me which ones you think I need.
I saw the ones back. Good.
I got all of them but the
That's
one
good.
that's okay?
Yeah, I think.
Really want to go by the screen.
I know, I can't, okay, which one is that?
Should we close the things behind?
No, there we go.
No.
Don't close that.
There it is. How many board members does it take to turn off the lights?
Say that with administrators in the auditorium all the time, trying to figure out the lights. Every time's the first time. So, really excited to finally present on class ranking top 10. I think it was about 11 years ago, probably, around this time when I first started, when we first, I'm pretty sure it was my first year here, when the topic of class rank came up, and it was decided to get rid of class rank, but the reality of that was it was a middle step in the road. It was a compromise of two systems, and we've been living with those two systems for a long time. And we've had a lot of success. It's defined a lot about our school, who we are as a school culture, and the things that we value. But the intent at that time, as I recall, and some of you were here then as well, was to do away with rank. But the reality is we really didn't. The reality is we were still ranking students because we had to. We had to be able to know who was in the top 10 and who was even close to being in the top 10. And that was kind of an ongoing process. On here, not part of that policy, I deliberately chose 3 words from our instructional practices committee charter around equity. You've heard Ms. Testa speak to it. Being equitable, inclusive, and personalized. And that's really, those words are really driving all the work of the steering committee, but in particular the top 10 committee. So just as a reminder, I won't read it to you, but like I said, the big words highlighted in there: equitable, inclusive, and personalized. And as directed by the school board, our purview is curriculum, pedagogy, assessment, school culture, and community, which I think if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's the importance of school culture and community. And what happens when you don't have that? We know what the impact of that is, certainly. It's given us a greater appreciation, but as has been suggested here and other places, we feel like we have some work to do on that as well, and really tackling this issue of the top 10 was determined to be a priority. So just to give folks a timeline, honestly, it feels even last year feels like 10 years ago, COVID time. I remember quickly getting this formed, and we had met weekly, I think, from the summer to the fall for the most part, and we were ready to go and present, like as we're doing here today. So before we did that, we had our Instructional Practices Committee. In the fall of 2019, we adopted our charter, which you just saw, and then the following subcommittees were formed. Again, just as a review, the top 10, weighted versus unweighted, and grading and assessment. And so, in my little bit of a crooked Venn diagram here, but somewhat appropriate, we know that it's all connected. Anytime these discussions have come up, either individually or as a whole, it became convoluted and complicated right away. Anytime we wanted to do something different with weighting, well, you got to do something about class rank. Anytime we talk about class rank, we really need to do something about weighting. And then, in one of those two, grading and assessment naturally came up. What about teachers? How do they grade? That's pretty much where the discussion ended, because everyone realized this was this is a monumental task that we're taking on. You're basically deconstructing a system that has worked really well over the years, and looking at what has served us well and what has no longer serves us well. And that was the work that we took pretty seriously. So in terms of the steering committee, we had the opening activities and discussions. A lot of heavy discussion we had as a group, and I have to say the top 10, based on looking at those meeting notes, was viewed as the least equitable, the least inclusive, and the least supportive of the three topics being covered by the subcommittees. When we met as a subcommittee, as a top 10 subcommittee, those views changed, and I'll get into that a little bit as well. But in terms of what the steering committee's view was, this is an area where we need to do a lot of work. And we decided that the thing to tackle first was the top 10, because until we dealt with that, the other things were going to be difficult to deal with, and it was going to be very difficult to come up with a decision regarding those other things, which were obviously very important. So just for folks at home, if you're watching, the subcommittee was pretty inclusive. We had 2 school board members, we had 3 students, we had 3 faculty, we had 6 parents, and 1 administrator. I think that equals 14. That's a pretty big committee for a subcommittee. That's a lot of individuals. I put out a survey of people who might be interested. I deliberately chose people that I knew would be vocal, that would be passionate about the subject one or the other, and I deliberately chose people that would have opposing viewpoints, because this particular, and I knew this, but I'm not sure that everybody that joined the subcommittee knew this. This whole identity around ranking students, and specifically the top 10, is a huge piece of this district's identity. It sounds weird to say that because we're so good at so many things, but if you're present in any one of those discussions, you would see that it really, really was ingrained as who we are as a community. So first things we did were having long discussions about the things that we thought were positive. What are the good things about ranking kids 1 through 10, and doing that every year. And some of that, I went through the many comments through the notes and came up with kind of themes. So this isn't totally inclusive, but these are the basic themes. People saw having the top 10 as preparing students for the real world. I kind of couldn't help but put it in quotes. It's one of my favorite phrases. It's like, what is the real world like? Especially after the pandemic. Like, okay. And competitive colleges. I personally added this idea of that counters the trophy for all paradigm. I would say, and again, this is based on my experience, I will speak even for myself, there is a desire that there are winners and there are losers. And that's okay, and that's something that should be encouraged. That sounds strange to say as an educator, but that mentality exists. We're one of the best schools in New Hampshire with the top 10. Why do we need to change it? We're already doing well. Why? Why are we doing this? Maybe used for competitive advantage for the top 10 and applying for colleges. Everyone has access. This idea that technically everyone has access. Technically, everyone does have access. But you can challenge some of those assumptions. But again, that was seen as a positive. How the top 10 or being in the top 10 gave one an advantage for merit scholarships. We had a lot of discussions about merit, and that started to lead us into discussions about weighting, and so we had to kind of bring ourselves back. But this idea of merit, because that's money in a lot of cases, a lot of money, was seen as something that was important. In terms of the negative pieces that were reviewed, and I think some of these carry some pretty heavy weight. Impacts on course selection. There is no doubt that we have students who have been in the top 10 in my time in the 10 years who deliberately avoid courses that they would like to take because they want to take courses that have more weighting and will better their rank. They know how to, from 6th grade, our students know what they need to take, where they need to be. One of the comments, and I've heard this multiple times, so this is pretty much fact in my opinion, that I've heard a number of 6th grade students or parents of 6th grade students say their kid will complain or be upset if they don't play a certain instrument because they'll never be in the top 10, because they know that there's a weighting system at the high school. If I don't play a certain instrument, I can't be in the honors band and freshman. That's one of the few weighted courses I get. I'm 11 years old, that it goes that deep. And that's true. I've heard that multiple times from people that don't even know each other. I can tell you, and people in the committee can tell you, there is a disproportionate allocation of school resources around calculating the top 10 and monitoring those students over their time in the high school. The schools they tend to get into tend to be accepted more prestigious end, and there's a lot of time that's spent on that, and it's absolutely not in proportion to what we spend in times to the other schools. And it goes even into the schedule. The schedule is built around students who are often having the most competitive course loads. It's also, there's also currently, and this is again, we had to be careful because this goes into weighting, but the playing field is not equal. So to say everyone has equal access is not necessarily true. And those of you who study this know, if having a weighted freshman course that you can only access if you are a talented singer or musician. If you're not, you don't have access to that because you don't have that ability, and you're at a disadvantage. And those individuals are able to count that for 4 years in a row. And that there is an advantage. That's just one example. Something we discussed at length and is a little uncomfortable to talk about in public, but it's true, and I think it's certainly what needs to be at least touched on. We believe, and again, this is not to say this is all the fault of the top 10. The top 10 is not responsible for every bad thing in the world, but there is an erosion of academic integrity that's happening. It happens in all competitive high schools when I talk to colleagues, but I've had a number of students, and it's only increased over the years of students, and it's not just students in the top 10. I would say a lot of our students who are competitive, whether or not they're in the top 10, they're concerned and have come to me and said, there's a lot of cheating that goes on. And students know that any edge you can gain actually gains you a rank. I have seen students bounce out of the top 10 on a bad midterm grade. One midterm grade out of their whole high school career has moved them out. I've seen students not be valedictorian over one test grade or one assignment in their whole high school career or one grade on a transcript. So any edge you get counts. Kids know that, and there is an issue there. Multiple people mentioned the competitive school environment that we currently have. Again, you can't just blame one thing, but this idea of if you're feeding this competitive environment, it can become toxic. That came up more than once. Then the argument was this is certainly not inclusive of at least 90% of some of our students and their successes, which we know are very significant and very substantial. And last, which is not least, we came up with core values that we talked about with NIASC that we want to align with. And when you look at those core values, which are integrity, I already talked about that, intellectual curiosity, which is generally driven by intrinsic qualities. As a school, and as what research shows, that kids learn better when they're intrinsically motivated. Motivating students with grades, and our students are very motivated by grades, is more of an extrinsic motivator. Again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to look at both where the research is going. Innovation, individuality, and involvement, and where does the top 10 fit with any of those? So that's another question. As was mentioned in the public comments, we did look at quite a bit of data. I did my own quick informal survey. I meet regularly with pretty much all the principals in the state of New Hampshire. I was able to get 23 of them to put something in writing in a survey. So 83% rank students in some way, shape, or form. It looks different at every single school, compared to about 17% that do not rank. And just in terms of, I'll say, schools that are around us that do rank are Bishop Burton, Nashua, Milford, Malvern. Those who don't rank, Bedford, Souhegan, and Bow. And I think we know that Bedford, Souhegan, and Bow get kids, and particularly Bedford, more so, get kids in the same schools that we're getting kids into. So it doesn't seem to be hurting them. Our school council department chair at the time pulled up, did do an amazing job looking back at 4 years worth of data. We looked at the top 10 over that 4 years in their college acceptances versus the top 25% of our students with the top 10 removed. The list of schools, if you put them side by side, as I did again last night, it looks like they're the same. So there are some differences. You do have some Ivies, and I'll talk about what about Harvard in a minute, but I can tell you I think we know there have been kids who've been in the top 10 who have gotten to Ivies. There are kids who have not been in the top 10 who've also gotten to Ivy League schools. And then there's also this kind of conception of, or perception that in order to be you have to be super competitive academically to get into Harvard. The reality is, as much as we do get kids into a lot of competitive schools, we're not sending a ton of kids to Ivy League schools. So that's not, no one is. They're competitive. They take maybe like 1% or 2% of people. So kind of the consensus of the group is if we're really gearing for these 5 or 6 Ivy League colleges, there's a whole lot of other kids. Most of our kids are not getting into those schools. So what kind of system we're building, who is it serving? So it was really interesting, and I would say this was a turning point. These discussions were hard, as was suggested by Vice Chair Solon. One time my role in it was mentioned as a referee, jokingly, and sometimes it felt like that a little bit. But these were tough discussions that we had. People have a lot of really strong opinions about one way or the other. For me, this was a turning point. When we saw the list of schools and we saw that they were very similar, not identical, but very similar, it was kind of like, oh, okay. So the top 25% are also getting accepted to a lot of these schools, and it doesn't seem to be hurting them to not be in the top 10. Where we finally moved to, after much discussion, was that, back to where we started. We are very competitive as a school district. We hire people who are super competitive. I would argue, myself included, a number of people in this room are themselves very competitive people. We pride ourselves on being competitive. That's not a bad thing. But where it fits in the overall picture, I think, is something that we need to consider. The one thing we know, the group understands, academic excellence is important. So how do we recognize that? How do we make that more inclusive and more equitable? So the proposal, which was more of a recommendation, was that we do move to something more of a Latin honors with fixed levels. So rather than picking 1 through 10, we set a bar. Anybody who meets the standard is in. If it's 5 kids 1 year, great. If it's 50, great. If it's 1, great. But the standard is the standard, and it's there for everybody to be able to get into. So we drafted a proposal. So I will go ahead and read this. The subcommittee recommends the practice of calculating and announcing class rank for the top 10 students be discontinued and replaced with a more equitable and inclusive practices that recognizes students' academic achievement as well as those students who are exemplars of our HBHS core values. Implementation should begin with the class of 2022, but no later than 2024. I put an asterisk next to 2022 because of the pandemic. Those individuals are now juniors. I would argue that as much as I feel this is important to do and follow, I don't know that you can do that to juniors at this point. They've already selected their courses, and that just wouldn't be right. So I think we'd have to probably amend the proposal. Those suggestions, as I mentioned, are included but are not limited to the Latin honor system that recognizes the top 10%. This is a much more inclusive group of individuals that goes beyond just 10 students. The top 10% isn't only a guide. The committee felt like there should be a GPA threshold, which I mentioned, and that everyone would be made aware of it in advance and they could meet that target. This was the other sticking point. Just when we thought we were about there and coming to an agreement, someone said, wait a minute, you're getting rid of valedictorian and salutatorian? And as facilitator, I said yes, because that's a rank. So I believe that if we're going to do something, we should do it. And valedictorian and salutatorian are 1 and 2. If you're either going to rank or you're not going to rank. And valedictorian and salutatorian are ranks. So that was a hard discussion because, again, we're really tied to our traditions at HB. And so, again, these are recommendations. Up to 3 speakers will be chosen for graduation. A future committee for implementation can review a variety of criteria and processes. And we know we have a lot of wonderful kids with wonderful talents. We saw this year having a different kind of graduation ceremony that you can do that and be successful. So these aren't things we should be afraid of. These are things that we should look at and possibly embrace. Back to the steering committee. So at that time, I know we've adjusted it for today. We came up with the first read of the policy of class rank, which was largely struck, black-lined, because it talked about ranking. The other piece of this that would need to be discussed at the steering committee, now if this proposal were to be adopted, I think we would probably have to wait for the weighting committee to finish their work, because now that they know what the target is, I think we would want that to be complete before we decided what the honor system looked like. You can make an argument both ways, or it could be parallel. And then the steering committee, it was decided, would be making a recommendation on the replacement. So no more subcommittees, we have a steering committee, people who've been with this work for a while now, and they can are informed enough on how to make an appropriate replacement. And that is all I have. I'm happy to take any questions. I'll do so at the desk if you don't mind.
Thank you, Rick. Great job.
Well done.
So, at this point, I want to open, did Beth leave? Okay. Are there any questions, any comments?
No, I've been a part of that steering committee, so I
Me too.
was aware of what was happening, and it's been impressive work, and I appreciate the subcommittee and all the work they put into it, and I know they attended a lot of meetings and did some hard work and researched and really put their heart into it in discussing it. It's very appreciated.
Thank you.
Is there any specific feedback you'd like? Did you have questions? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
With regard to the asterisk date of implementation, I couldn't hear real clearly what drove that, other than I think it's a bit of uncertainty about this year. I guess my question is, are we really in a position this year to equitably even assess class rank?
Are you asking if we're able to just do what we normally do?
Yeah, because of the fact that we've got such a unusual mix of learning environments, and I know from discussions we had following this past spring, the ability to form traditional assessments of student performance has been compromised by the mix. I don't know to what degree, it's really early now, but to what degree that's likely to continue. So in the context of that, are you proposing an potential earlier implementation? I wasn't sure what the asterisk meant.
No, the asterisk meant it probably, if it was going to start with, the fair thing to do would be 2023, not the juniors, but to start with the sophomore class, so the underclassmen would know in advance.
Okay, then in that context, it's not really part of the proposal question, but I'll go back to the earlier question. Do you think you can make a good assessment of this year's performance for an apples-to-apples comparison?
I think there's two questions. Can we or should we? Can we? Yeah, we absolutely can punch in numbers and calculate.
I didn't ask if you can calculate. I said you can calculate an equitable one, so that may be the should you.
Right. So should we? I think we should. I mean, everybody had the same access to some degree. Everyone was in the same boat. I could easily make that argument whether it worked out well or didn't work out well for an individual. In the spring, we were all remote, one way or the other. I don't know what the alternative to that would be.
Well, because the unknown for me is whether or not the staff is making apples-to-apples assessments, because there was a concern that the ability to make assessments for the remote students and perhaps by the remote teachers was being compromised, understandably, not intentionally.
Sure.
But just say, give people the benefit of the doubt, because there's a lot of things that
Right.
really matter beyond just performance on a quiz or a test. But to me, that somewhat undermines the continuity of the process.
Yeah,
So you say, what's the alternative? The alternative is we've got a template here, potentially, to perhaps implement it earlier rather than later.
in theory, I'm in favor of doing this sooner rather than later. However, having sat in the committee, as you did too, within the top 10, that was a pretty vocal group, and I would say they were very, very informed, and I feel like they're pretty representative of the community as a whole. I don't think that would go over very well.
You don't think there'd be any change in people's positions based on the current learning environment?
It's tough because I did this committee all prior to it. It was all before the pandemic, so it's hard to know. I feel like there could be, and like I said, I don't necessarily like having to push it back to another year, but I also believe in being fair, and so that's what I'm torn with. Our kids are very invested in terms, especially the kids that are applying for top 10 and doing this type of thing and gearing up for it. They've been focused on this since 5th or 6th grade, a lot of them, to a person. And to pull that out now, I don't know that that's fair.
I would agree with that. I would also just add that we're having a discussion now. Next month it'll be a first read. Maybe, Rick, you could put that in your newsletter
Sure.
as being a topic to send information potentially to the board. So if there is a strong feeling in either direction, that can be communicated so that you have input when voting on a policy.
Right. So for your information, Tom, the policy wasn't in the deliberation, so we're not actually going to bring the policy on the floor today.
I understand that. I just, because of the time sensitivity of anything that might impact this current school year,
Right.
I want to raise the issue now, even if it's independent of it. I think it's wrapped into this, and the idea of getting a sense of the population on it,
Right.
because it would not surprise me to have people want this year treated as an exception regardless of a policy change.
I think it's possible to, hear from others, from members of the community on this. I do know that as members of the steering committee, we kind of made it clear, I thought it was clear that we wouldn't make this kind of a change to impact the kids who were currently living under the system that has been created for 11 years. And so, and what I think the thing I'm sensing from you is that you're seeing the current juniors as existing as part of that system. They've made
Right.
decisions based on the system that has been in place for 11 years, and so, or for longer. How assessments work and those pieces, I completely hear what you're saying, Tom, and yes, this year is it's different, but to change the system in the middle of the year, might be.
I understand, and
Right.
I'm not necessarily advocating.
Sure.
Right.
Again, I didn't
Just-
hear how Rick summed that up, so I was
Just
trying to see if that was what he was capturing, because I based on previous discussions, I'm more concerned about the seniors this year than the juniors.
Right. Beth, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say thank you for all the work that went into it, because it's, I know this was a really, really big topic to tackle. I really appreciate all the recommendations and support. I think Tom brings up awesome questions. It is a concern of mine. My only concern is the timing, and I hear from freshmen and sophomores about this, that talk about this every day. So that's my, my initial thought is just that, when it is implemented, the current high school students, are grandfathered out. I don't know, but I think your question's a very good one, a very valid one, Tom. But I think it's the best we've got for right now, and I don't know how we would change it, but I think it's definitely a very good question.
So I think what we can do is in policy, we can come back, because the policy that we've attached here doesn't say when this will start. So we could talk about it in policy
Sure.
and bring it back and have a conversation as to when, maybe get some feedback if you have any sense of that from the community. I think in policy we'll have a conversation a little bit about how this is a unique set of circumstances, but I do know that, yeah, I'm concerned because kids who walk into the high school expect a certain system, and when we make a change, we usually try to give people a little bit of time. Go ahead, Krista.
And I hear what you're saying, but I think, I definitely feel like freshman and sophomore would be able to adjust to it, and it certainly isn't as if no recognition would be given at all,
Right.
because there is going to be recognition given.
Right.
It would just be in a different format, and I certainly believe by their senior year, that would be, they'd adjust to that very easily, because it's not as if no recognition is going to be given
Correct.
for academic achievement at all.
Right.
It's just not going to be just
10
10
kids.
Yeah, so I think we can bring the dates and the timing back to policy. My only question to the board is, we doctored this, we, took everything out of this policy. We did not include in the policy, anything related to a Latin honors or recognition or academic recognition. I think we all kind of thought that that would be, more appropriate in the program of studies or in, the handbook. So I just want to hear from the board if anyone feels like it needs to be, because we'll bring it back to policy and we'll bring the whole thing up for first read. If anyone on the board feels like it needs to be in the policy, that we are going to produce, have some sort of academic recognition.
Well, if it's not there, when would it be determined, or how would we put it in place?
The subcommittee or the steering committee would come up with a proposal,
After that.
and I guess we can adopt it as a proposal or put it in the program of studies. So that's my question. Does it have to be in
So
policy?
we talked about it a little bit
Mm-hmm.
towards the end, I mean, about
Ye-
grade point averages and things like that.
And my sentiment at this point, if I'm being asked, is that it be not be put into policy. I think you need to put something in there that academic recognition is going to happen, because for the next person, they just decide to wipe it out, they could. But to keep, one of the most difficult challenges that we deal with when doing all this is that we have these multiple policies, and because some of them are so specific, that's where the overlapping starts to happen. And
Right.
there's some of the contradiction starts to happen, and we're locked in from doing certain things, and it becomes problematic.
Because the board still has to approve the program of
Right.
studies anyway.
Correct.
Exactly.
Question.
Sure.
I saw that you left in the element of the option for class rank for our military academies.
Yep.
Is it possible to find out if that is still required in the same manner that it was when that was added? I'm just wondering because a lot of changes have occurred in just all sorts of credentialing for post-secondary. And in addition, I do know that some of the schools, or several of the schools that do not have a no rank policy, particularly many of the private schools, have no problems with their students enrolling. So can that investigation?
Sure.
Yeah, and I intended to do that because that's a piece that I think needs to be looked at too, that I think we would take up in policy.
So we'll
'Cause-
bring that back to policy
Yep.
as well. Make sure that that's something that we at least have an answer for.
Yep, and we can get answers for that. The military will say one thing, and we can ask the individual schools what they do.
So that gives us some direction, I think.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Good job. Thank you. Okay. Where'd my agenda go? Great. We're at the BudCom update. Who's handling that?
I'm going to take that.
Oh, great.
Cindy was kind enough to type up a summary of the May 2nd, the June 25th, and the August 27th meetings. I'm just going to take a couple minutes and focus on August 27th as we play a little bit of catch-up. The annual audit that we usually provide to the Budget Committee in August was postponed just because of the pandemic and the work of the auditors. That'll be more likely to be done in October and November. One of the things that we had discussed in the June meeting was our athletic trust. There was a question brought up. The way we do the trust is it's funded out of the unreserved fund balance. And there was potential, when you look at how the warrant articles are written on the warrant, that if the dollars weren't there, the athletic trust may not get funded. The concern was that revenue source comes directly from parents. And if it was voted down, returning that money to taxpayers isn't necessarily correct either. So I'm going to talk about a little further detail on that. So Kelly reached out to legal, and we have some information on that. We want the board to recognize coming up in FY22 will be the biannual rate change for New Hampshire retirement. So that in itself is going to be a budgetary item. We don't have that yet.
Oh, we don't have the numbers yet?
We don't have the numbers yet. I just wanted to let you know it's
I have
coming.
them.
Oh, you do have it now.
I can give them to you.
Excellent.
Yep, just hang on.
Good. Thank you, Linda.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a ballpark without precise. The employee rate is going from 11% to 14%, more or less, and the teacher rate is going from 17% to 21%, almost. I can get the precise and if I keep digging, but
employer rate?
this is what the employer pays.
No, I thought you said employee. at
Well, they
first.
call it employee, so basically it's support staff versus teacher,
Oh,
generally,
but is this what's paid by the district?
Yes.
Or what's paid by the?
by the district.
Okay,
Yeah. There's just two categories of employees.
so the lower one is the
Support staff.
Support
Yeah.
staff.
So as we head into right.
Yeah, that's
Right.
huge.
Right. So as we head into FY22, that's one of the first items that I wanted the board to recognize that is, as we would say, somewhat beyond our control.
Is this the last year of adjustment, or is there one more?
I believe there's another one in the next, like 2024.
They do every 2 years, so we just finished
But it
2
was
years.
over a 10-year period, I thought.
Correct, and then we were supposed to revisit the whole solvency.
Yeah, so I'm
Of it.
just curious if this was the fourth or the fifth installment of that 10 years.
I want to say it's the fourth. I could be wrong though, Tom.
I think it is, because I thought it was gonna go up to 25%.
Yeah.
And the actual numbers are 14.06% and 21.02%.
So along with that increase, first of all, we have no new staff requests at the high school or the middle school as we start into the budget process. We have phase 2 of Rick's tech proposal. That was a multi-year plan that will be in the proposal. We have a regular tech replacement cycle at the middle school, but it's a kind of large group of computers. As you know, which we'll be discussing in non-meeting, we have both teacher and paraeducator contract negotiations, which could lead to 2 warrant articles. And then the item that I wanted to give you a little background on is the athletic trust, and then I wanted to get some input from you on the maintenance trust. With regard to the athletic trust, in Kelly's research, both our auditor and our legal counsel is recommending we consider moving to a non-lapsing athletic fee revolving fund. This comes under the statute as RSA 194:3-C. And what it does, it says, we would ask the voters, shall the school district establish a non-lapsing athletic revolving fund in accordance with RSA 194:3-C to be funded by receipts from athletic events and fees, further to raise and appropriate the sum of whatever it is for the purpose of supporting athletic programs in the district, with said amount to be withdrawn from the revolving fund at whichever intervals we would schedule as needed. And it would be a majority vote, and if that changed, then the athletic fees would go into this revolving fund. All the mechanisms for spending them would be the same, meaning the budget committee would work with the athletic department to target specific items that would be bought out of the funds. The board would be made aware of how the funds are used. The board would be made aware of ending balances in the funds and have the ability to expend those funds if they so chose. What it will do, though, is it will take the funds away from the unreserved fund balance. Meaning that if the athletic trust was the last warrant article and it couldn't be funded, it wouldn't be funded, and that money came to us via parents. The system that would help us with this now is, as you know, a few years ago, we moved from the old method of getting a check for the athletic fees, and that sometimes remained in the student's backpack for months, and sometimes we get a call that the student had never turned it in. Now we went to the family website register, and everybody pretty much, I'd say almost 100% uses a credit card, and those funds automatically come over to the SAU business office. So we kind of closed that gap of what used to happen was way back when, many years ago, it went from collection into the principal's fund, into expenses, and that wasn't working as well as we wanted. So we moved to this, which has worked very well. But after last year's vote, all of a sudden about 400 people rejecting that warrant article, it created the concern. So both the auditor and legal have recommended we look at that. I wanted to make the board aware, Kelly will be bringing it back to the budget committee, and we'll have a recommendation at some point to see if we want to move forward with that warrant article. But I'll do my best to answer any questions on just the athletic fund, and then when we're done with that, I'll move over to the maintenance trust.
Anybody have any questions? Tom?
The collections will go into the general fund, and this will become a budget line item if it's made to a revolving fund, or is it still a separate warrant article?
It is, no, it's a separate warrant article to get approval, and then
Yeah.
it becomes a budget line item.
Okay, and therefore, the actual amount can float depending on what we actually collect? As
What
to
we
how much
collect?
gets transferred?
Or what we want to expend, like if in a given year we have.
Right, I
more-
understand the expense,
Yeah.
but I was just curious about how it got funded. So the money gets collected the same way, but instead of relying on it to be left over at the end of the year and transferred.
Right.
So what, does it get funded in the same year it gets collected then?
Yes,
In this
that,
new form too?
yes.
Okay. So a lot of advantages.
Is this something
Yeah.
that has to be voted on every year?
No, once the community gives us approval at the annual meeting to move to this, then what happens, it becomes a line item in the budget that we report on during the budget season.
So it's not up to, it's just voted once, okay.
Correct. Any other questions on the athletic trust before I move over to maintenance?
No, but that sounds good.
Okay. The maintenance trust, I wanted to bring it up now because last year we got to pretty much the end of the budget process, and we had a discussion regarding the maintenance trust versus a bond. And we just wanted to, early in the budget process, make sure we moved forward in the direction that the board wanted us to. We've had a similar discussion with the budget committee with regard to major expenses. I had distributed a sheet, and on one side was the athletic trust, and on the back side was a little chart that Kelly had done last year at the end of our December for the budget committee. It's, it should have been, the front side should have been the athletic trust
I
information.
don't think you got, gave that out. I didn't get one.
Oh, I must have missed a couple people. I'll pass them.
We're fine. Did you get one, Krista?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I
You
must
got
have
that
just-
side.
I must have just gone to the right.
It's fine. You
Sorry.
like that side better. It's fine. We're used to that.
So on the back side of this, the budget committee had asked for some examples of if we went to a bonded type of situation, what would we be looking at? So Kelly put this together, and this was in December 2019. And it would be replacement windows at Hollis Brookline Middle School, the roof sections 5 through 7, masonry repairs at the high school, the elevator at the middle school, security cameras at the high school, the continued paving of the high school, repurposing life skills, main office security upgrades, egress traffic issues, energy efficiencies, water systems upgrades, and LED light upgrade. And those are just the ones she pulled out to give the budget committee and now the board a kind of understanding of, we do have some significant items that are coming down the pike, and we've known that. But what we've been doing in the past is doing those through the maintenance trust and increasing that number on a given year to do a section of a roof or what may be. And with the bond rates becoming very low, there was a question last year about, did we want to move in a maintenance trust direction, or do we want to keep maintenance trust for items that are more in that $20,000 range and below, and start to move our bigger items into bonds? Or, for that matter, you could also look at a lease. Many of these items would be eligible for leases as well. And if you looked at a bond, you would get the one payment, say, over 10 years, which would balance what I would call building items more over the community life, because we do see a fluctuation in people moving in and out, so these would become more of a shared cost over the life of a person living in the community, as opposed to, let's say we did energy efficiencies for $1 million. If we started to break that down at $200,000 a year in maintenance trust, that you're going to start to get more of a tax spike. So it's just two different methods, and being this early in the process for FY22, Kelly and I wanted to ask the question and get some feedback to bring back to the budget committee, who I won't say was opposed or in favor at this point, but they understood the rationale. So I wanted to put it out to the board and get your thoughts and see if you had direction for us. Excuse me.
So, some feedback for Andy. Tom, would you like to go first?
If you'd like me to.
Sure, that'd be awesome.
It may come as no surprise to you that I am very much in favor of this approach for multiple reasons. One is
The bond approach.
Yes, one is the distribution aspect that you discussed, but the other is the ability to plan and have that money allocated so that you can actually do these things as a preventive measure rather than an emergency repair measure. Allows you to schedule them appropriately. The idea of being able to take care of these long-term capital improvements in a managed, responsible manner is much easier than counting on a maintenance trust fund that needs to get allocated each year and then hope that the money is available.
Anyone else? Krista?
I know, I'm thinking. I think there's pros and cons. I agree with Tom. It really does help in planning, and I do agree with that. I get nervous with bonds like this. I get nervous that taxpayers are opposed to us giving them big giant bonds in this sense, especially a $3 million bond or $33,500,000 bond. So I guess I'd want to make sure that we understand that if it's a bond that we're taking care of the maintenance, that we wouldn't have to be doing this in another couple of years. You know, I mean, I just don't want to be putting out $3.5 million bonds every few years saying it's a maintenance issue, because I just think that's my concern for the taxpayer. But I do understand the work has to get done. You're right.
I'm agreeing with you, and that's where I would hope that the bond would be done with a lot of forethought and planning so that it doesn't do that, and that there might be a minimal maintenance trust remaining for a surprise.
Right.
An emergency, but that this has to be done with a lot of forethought.
Right.
I think that's
we know the elevator's going to go anytime, so.
I have similar concerns to Krista. I actually think from a planning perspective, financial perspective, this makes a lot of sense to go through a bond. But we need voters to support it, and I'm not sure how we present this and get voters behind it. And I mean, it's something we we could spend a lot of time and effort doing, and if it fails, then we're back to where
I'm
are we
not
gonna
even
get.
sure that everything on this should go into the
Right,
bond.
so I feel like there's a
Right.
lot of work to be done there, and like,
Right.
it's just that in my experience in this community, in order to pass a bond, because it's a higher threshold, you need to get people invested in that. And so when it's like, it's a roof, and it's like energy systems, and, well, what is it? So, I just think that becomes a hard, it's stuff that needs to get done, and, maybe we would argue that some of these things don't need to get done, but, if we as a board feel like this needs to get done, and it's over a certain amount of money, I do think bonding it makes sense. But I just think, so I think pursuing, if your question is, should I pursue it as a bond, I would support that for this in the beginning, but I'd like to know a little bit more about this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like a little
Perhaps
bit
one
more.
of the things that could be done here is identify the ones that there's no option. So for instance,
Like the
roof
roof.
sections, you're gonna have to do, the elevator by law, we're going to have. But the repurposing of rooms, that, to me, falls under a discretion. Granted, it's capital, but I could easily support something like that being pulled out,
Yeah.
where you've got the ones that we don't have a choice. If the roof fails, it gets replaced. If the road is untravelable, it can get replaced. And even to the point of, it doesn't have to be a single bond. So for instance, you could have a paving bond if you wanted to have, if you think you're gonna have $500,000 in paving, do people support paving?
Right. And I guess I also wonder if I think this is a really interesting way of looking at this, but I'm not so sure this is the year to do it.
Right.
Because with the pandemic and with the financial situations of so many people in our community, I feel like people in this community do not like to take on debt. And taking on a bond is taking on debt. And so it concerns me that we would go forth through the budget process with a plan for a bond, and then that doesn't pass, or people get angry that we're even asking for it after this particular year. And then we're kind of scrambling to figure out how we're gonna actually do what we need to do this year to forward our maintenance plans.
Don't we have that same risk, though, with funding a maintenance trust out of a balance?
We do.
We do. I think the other piece that I mentioned is we will have 2 contracts potentially on the warrant. And it's like, how much can we ask in 1 year? So,
How many years does this list span? Is this like part of a 5-year CIP, or?
you're probably into at least the next 5 years, but some of it, like energy efficiencies, that's more of a discussion. We could move the high school and middle school to 100% solar and eliminate electric bills. We're the #1 user, which we've already proven at the Hollis Primary and Hollis Upper. So there are some of these that are also payback items, but maybe should stand on their own because they are payback. So I think what I'm getting a sense for is we should kind of do some planning of multiple scenarios. In October, as we start to get more into the budget with the budget committee, get their input on where they'd like to go, but balancing that with the point of, we have to be worried that if a bond doesn't pass, we're still gonna have maintenance issues. We don't wanna necessarily jeopardize the operating budget or any other warrant article we may have because of asking for too much of a bond. And there's also the unknown still, and I don't have this year's numbers back from NESDAQ, but if you recall, our projections were from like 2025 to 2030 of our enrollment going up. Now, if that actually became the reality of what they're predicting, we would probably be in need of some classrooms, and that would be a huge concern, and we'll have a better handle, 2023, 2024. But if we've already asked for, say, this type of a dollar amount, I can't see, I don't think I could support that.
Right,
if
and
I
this
was a
does
taxpayer.
cost us more. Like,
Yep.
this is borrowed money, so we're
Yep.
gonna pay interest on that. So I think laying out a few scenarios and bringing
Yep.
it back in October would probably be the best way for us to make a better decision. And I think also,
we didn't have this information, so we'll have a little bit
Yep.
more information in the packet next month for those of us who maybe didn't weigh in, so we have a little bit more time to process it. Does that make sense? Okay. Does that help you a little?
Yep,
Great.
perfect.
Okay, so the next piece on our discussion is the diversity, equity, and inclusion update.
Yeah, since our last meeting, I have reached out and had people contact me with a willingness to serve on this committee. And this committee is kind of what I would say an advisory group to help me go through topics, go through research, gain information, and then come back and make recommendations to the board. So nothing's off the table. I'm just going to go through the people who have committed. I'm not going to go into an extensive background tonight, but I will share that at a future time. But the committee hasn't really got together and been able to meet yet. But we have Kylie Rascu, who's a parent at the high school, Dr. Marie Ramos, who has children in multiple schools, Andrew Scott, who has children who have graduated and still has more in our school system, Jarrell Smith, who is on HB Elevates and has children in our school system, David Werner, who's a community member who's expressed interest in this, and Tiffany Testa, who is here with us tonight. These 6 people, as well as others who have contacted me, will have roles in this, because even though people are not necessarily on that first group of advisory board, we have people that will be assisting with public forums and gathering information for us. We have other people that have expertise because of their teaching credentials, their college teaching credentials, that are willing to assist us and guide us through around some of the curriculum pieces that we're likely to encounter as we move forward. For the committee, our primary role is to begin the process of discussing our strategic objectives regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion for all students. So this is something that when we think of the portrait of a cavalier, we want this to be, what do we want our 12th grader to look like? And then by a backwards by design approach, how do we go all the way back down to preschool and start to embed this so it becomes part of it? I've been doing a lot of reading since last month, and one of the gentlemen I've done some research on is a Dr. Robert Sellers. He's out of the University of Michigan, and though I don't subscribe to everything he talks about, he had one piece that really made sense for me, because I'm going to ultimately need to explain this to children. I know we as adults have this difficult topic, but we're talking about students. And he compares diversity, equity, and inclusion to a dance. And I thought that was pretty good, because most kids know what a dance is. And he says diversity is that everyone is invited to the party. And equity, everybody contributes to the playlist. And inclusion, everyone has the opportunity to dance. Some people may, some people may not. And I thought this was really good when I was sitting there trying to think about curriculum and saying, how was I going to address this with a 6-year-old who's in kindergarten to the senior in high school? And what made me really think about it was I walked in the other day, and a PE teacher at Hollis Primary School was doing remote PE. And I'm walking down the hall, and first of all, I'm hearing him doing his lesson. I'm like, and I'm kind of getting upset because we're not supposed to have kids in the gym. You know, and I'm like, what's he doing in the gym? He knows we're not supposed to be in the gym. And I get there, and he is with his computer, and they're doing dance. And all the little kids at home are doing dance on the screen. And it was absolutely uplifting, but it also showed me that, like, that's a concept that we teach right at the beginning, because movement is so critical to the development of children, and dance is a concept that everybody understands. The 2 programs we're going to look at, or start with, are programs that we already have in use in the SAU. The first one is called the CASTLE program. It stands for Collaboration for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. Gina did extensive work with this a couple years back when we started up our social and emotional programming. And then the second one, which Bob had been very involved with, is the Choose Love program. And we brought that in, again, because of what it does for social and emotional. But both of these programs that our teachers are familiar with also have expanded their repertoire to include diversity, equity, inclusion. So we'll start looking at those because we have a familiarity to those and feel it's a very good starting point for our staff. During our efforts, one of the things that I'm looking at is a concept that I've done some research on. It's called a courageous conversations. And I say this because, again, when I look at that student who graduates Hollis Brookline High School, if we can send our graduates off to college or the work environment, wherever they go, and they're willing to have these courageous conversations about any topics, then I think we've prepared them well. And a courageous conversation is any conversation when participants commit to engage each other with honesty, open-mindedness, and listen deeply to better understand each other's perspectives. And I think when I look at that, that to me works like if I'm doing an evaluation with one of the people that works for me. I have to have a courageous, honest conversation if that individual is going to get better for me. When I put my coaching hat on from years ago, you need to be able to sit down with a student and have an honest conversation about how they can improve or why they're not playing. The same goes true for a teacher. So this, again, was a skill that I believe we need to teach to our students, but at the same time, I think it already goes on in many, many levels in our SAU. The group that I chose is going to bring a diverse perspective that represents our students and our communities. And we will have students on a committee. We just want to have some discussion, me particularly, with the adults, because it can be very difficult for a student to be on a committee with adults. So we want to develop our norms and talk about our discussion procedures, because again, these children, high school and middle schoolers, would be taking a step out on the ledge, and we need to be there to support them. We would look to create a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, and it may be that we start out with the resolution I read tonight that starts to frame our future work on the statement that we'll do, but that statement would go through what I would call public forums, board reviews, and things like that, and it would be a kind of very transparent process where we would make sure that we define the words, what we meant in our SAU. The committee, I don't see this as, again, kind of like our advisory for COVID. We don't communicate regularly right now, but that community is there and available to me should I have questions, and that's how I envision the future alignment of this committee for diversity and equity and inclusion. So our goals are activities. So if you said to me, what are we going to deliver potentially? And again, the committee hasn't met, so this is just me, but looking at some things that I think we need to deliver as a superintendent. I think we have to discuss and come to a realization of what a baseline understanding of what diversity, equity, and inclusion means for SAU 41. You know, what does it mean in Hollis and Brookline and the schools that we service? We need to conduct information sessions to gather input from the community. This can't be done in isolation, and it has to have more stakeholders than just people with kids in school. We need to take some time and go through and identify what we're already doing. We have some absolutely wonderful work being done by our teachers right now, and we need to capture that by grade level, kind of look at that from a curriculum standpoint, and what do we want for a K-12 piece, but we need to find out what we're already doing, because we have book groups going on, we have teachers who have selected literature and different pieces in their curriculum areas to really foster these type of conversations in their classrooms. We also want to look at all our clubs and activities. What do we already have going on that promotes this, and how can we utilize our groups, organizations, whatever it may be, to enhance our integration in the future? And then, as I said, just trying to look at, does Choose Love or Castle programming have access points that we expand upon, or do we as a committee go in a different direction and find something else that may be better suited for this type of work. So we're not limiting this committee. We're not saying we have a certain date to be done by. One of our first things we'll do is develop norms and have conversations so that we get to know each other and our thoughts around these topics. And then we'll study the Hollis Brookline Non-Discrimination and Equity Initiative statement that was read tonight and decide where we would like to look at that. And the committee will work with me to outline a process that I'll bring back to the board. We would bring recommendations, and then each of the three boards would vote. And obviously, each of those recommendations would be developmentally appropriate for the age group we're talking about. So if there are people in the community that are still interested, they are most welcome to contact me. This is not a closed committee. We have multiple things that will need to be done and would welcome other people. And there are some people that I have already, who have been, their names have been provided to me, but I haven't spoken to them firsthand yet. So they weren't mentioned tonight, but that doesn't mean they won't be an integral part of the committee. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about that
Update?
update.
Thank you very much
you.
for that update. Does anybody have, I have questions, but go ahead. Oh. So it was brought up that, somebody mentioned in public input, diversity, equity, and inclusion credentials. Do you feel like you've found some people with that on the committee? I mean, I don't know what those kind of credentials would be like.
Well, I think in my discussions with committee members, we have the knowledge and ability to reach out and gain expertise when we feel that's necessary. One of the balancing acts was to kind of determine where we are as an SAU and to know exactly what we were looking for, whether it be hiring a consultant to do a piece of data work that we don't feel we can do, to hiring a consultant who can direct our work in an area that we're struggling with or stumbling. But again, I think it would be a little too soon for me to do that because the committee my hope was to actually do something this week with the committee via Zoom, and then the reality of school got in the way again. We had some other issues that we had to solve, so we'll probably get together at the beginning of next week if everything goes well.
Okay, great. And go ahead, Tom. No, I don't have anything else really. It's kind of going in my head. So.
To put this in context for the board, what would you anticipate to be outcomes or work product from the committee that would then result in board consideration or action?
I think one would be if the committee agrees with the statement that I read earlier tonight. They may tweak it, they may decide to change it. I would bring that potentially back for a board vote on a document like that or something similar to that. I would bring back the work of the committee on the curriculum piece, because the board oversees curriculum, and highlight maybe areas that are strong and areas for improvement from a standpoint in the co-op grades 7 through 12. I would look at potentially areas where we feel as a committee that we need professional development for staff, and maybe we could locate experts to come in and provide those type of workshops or pieces to open school or whenever we see fit. That may also require an expenditure of dollars. So that there'd be different pieces as we went along that fall under the board purview that would need board votes.
I wasn't here when you read the document, although I have read it and I've read some of the previous ones. I have some concerns about doing something under the heading of a resolution, because my familiarity with resolutions is that they're often used in situations where they are gestures or recognition type things that are an end point, but that what we face are things potentially requiring action. And I would be uncomfortable supporting something that would perhaps have the appearance or the effect of, okay, we've said we want to do good things. I would be much more supportive of actions such as the type of things that you listed. If you do those things, you don't need a resolution. That's my opinion.
And again, I think, as I said, I think it's important when community members send me things that are intended for the board, that they come to the board, so I wanted to read that tonight. I liked in this latest document, I didn't necessarily agree with everything, but I'm a big fan of strategic priorities and the strategic plan. And we're in that process anyways, and we're doing the work for a portrait of a graduate. And I think, you know, these are skills that we know our students are going to have, whether it's, you know, how to deal with their social, emotional selves, whether it's these courageous conversations, all of those. So I think once the committee gets this document, I think you'll see tweaking and potential discussion around how we incorporate it. But I do want to thank them because, again, I believe they heard the board and heard many of the community members, and this is kind of, you know, a step moving forward.
Yeah, I am echoing what Tom's saying. When I read this, and so I'm saying two things. At the risk of sounding defensive, when I read this, I think, gosh, that makes it look like we don't do anything and we don't care about anybody except white kids getting good grades. And I know that's not the case, and we have all these policies that are in place that support all the things that I believe is what people would like to see in program of studies. That being said, that's my defensive part. That being said, I agree we need to work, and knowledge is power. And so I support more of the professional development. I support the curriculum. I support those are the things that I would like to see, because I do believe that's important. I think the more information we can give students and our staff, and the more we can understand, the better we are. I mean, in every way, shape, or form. So I totally support that. So I sometimes, you know, see this and I'm like, okay, but we aren't not trying. But I know, and Brooke mentioned that today in her comment, that we have a great school system. And it's just sometimes when we get some of the letters, and sometimes when people say in public, there are no policies supporting it. Well, yes, there are. But given that information, policies don't necessarily trickle down to curriculum. Policies don't trickle down to professional development. So I support it. I would like to see get an update from the committee every month if we could, and hear what's happening. And I would like to see deliverables, and I support the knowledge and getting information out there.
And I think you raise a good point that I did not mention but had thought about. I mean, other pieces of action items for the board would be student handbooks, because we would be updating those to reflect this, as well as potential policy upgrades, which would go to policy committee. So there'd be a number of action pieces to the board. It's just that blending of all these different components that have to happen into one package, for lack of a better word.
Right. And I appreciate you putting this together. I appreciate the committee taking the time to work on this.
Kate?
Yeah, just want to say I really appreciate that you've actually managed to start this process all while trying to get everybody back in school during a pandemic. And I'm excited to see where this takes us. I think it's necessary. I'm really happy to see that we are moving in this direction, and I look forward to updates.
Great, thanks, Kate. Sure. So I just want to kind of go a little, I do think a resolution is kind of a gesture, but I don't think it's an empty gesture. I think it's a gesture. And I think it's important that sometimes it's important for people to take a stand and make a statement. And so I'm not prepared to say that this is the exact wording or the exact language that I would want to see. But I think as a board to come out and say, no, we support this concept, that we want some direction to be, you know, we'd like to see the direction, we'd like to see this as part of our conversations, as we'd like to see that be a focus. I think you're right, Tom, it's a gesture, and I would prefer to see all the action items take place, but sometimes a gesture is a powerful message. And so that's just what I'm saying. I'm not saying where I am on all of this, I'm just saying. So. Is there anything else?
Not on that topic.
Okay, so you're going to report back on that next
October.
month?
Yep.
Okay, so like October, we've got the budget. I'm just going to build my agenda as we're talking about budget and DEI, I guess is what we're going to call it. Okay. Okay, the next thing is committee appointments. That, I think, is mine.
Yes.
Oh, wow, look at me. Okay, so I just am going to need to have a motion to approve some appointments. So I'm going to go through the committee appointments.
We don't need to approve them, you can just tell us.
Oh, I don't know. It looks like Dawn wants me to approve them.
You,
have them approved.
for appointments, it's
No,
always been
appointments is
chair's
chair.
discretion.
Okay, so then, okay, so we don't need a motion. Do I need to announce them? I thought I did this already. Should we refresh our
There was
memories?
only one I thought that you said was still open.
Right, so the budget committee is Cindy Francona. The SAU governing board budget committee is Beth. There was a little conflict, I wasn't sure it was Beth or Cindy. The co-op policy committee is Holly, Krista, and Beth, right? SAU governing board policy committee, that would be Cindy, she's working on that. Negotiations for HEA is Tom, Liz, and Cindy. Negotiations for HESSA is Holly, Krista, and Kate, right? Did we appoint you for that? I thought I did. Kate, I think you've been appointed to that.
Apparently I have been.
Facilities committee, as Cindy and I have been doing that. Signing manifests, Cindy and Beth do that, but Kate's
I've actually been doing it.
It's you two that are doing it, and then Cindy's the alternate. Thank you. I'm sorry. That's the only one I wasn't sure of. And then instructional best practices steering committee. We haven't done that one in a long time. So I know I'm on that, and Chris is on that. And are you on the steering?
I
Tom?
was.
Steering, okay.
You haven't been removed.
So nobody's left.
But is it still going on?
Well, it
We
will
haven't,
be.
we haven't met, it's
Okay.
frozen in time.
For a lot of secret meetings.
It was secret meeting without you.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
seriously.
that's good. So I think that's all, okay, and I don't need those to be approved. Okay, I just.
The only other one was, I didn't know if you want to put on as HB Elevate this week.
Oh, and HB Elevates, Tom is our representative on HB Elevates. But usually that would be the board chair's role, but we have a conflict because one of the board members of HB Elevates is my husband. And I don't like to meet with him, so. Okay,
We added the discussion topic of the SAT.
okay, yeah, thank you. The SAT testing topic, thank you.
Take that?
Gee,
Hi.
we added SAT testing to the topic. to the
All right,
discussion.
so we are back in school, and the state has decided to offer some mandatory state assessments for us in October. So because
Offered to be mandatory.
Yes.
and so we are going to be able to provide all of our students with what they didn't have in the springtime. So for the school day administration of the SAT, which is the grade 11 mandatory state test, which is typically offered in the springtime, and they didn't have that, we're doing the school day administration of the SAT on October 14th. That is an in-person paper and pencil test for all students, remote or in person. So we would need to offer that to all seniors back in person, regardless of if your enrollment status is remote. In addition to that, it's also the PSAT day mandatory for juniors on October 14th. So all juniors will take that.
Wait, they're doing it on the same day?
Yep, and then we have 10th graders who have paid for the PSAT as an option for them on October 14th. And the freshmen and the sophomores who did not opt to pay for the PSAT do not have an assessment for the day. We also have PSAT 8-9 for our 8th graders available on October 14th. Do you see the theme here? And for 7th graders, we do not have an assessment on that day. So we have additional assessments, just as a side note, for our 8th graders, well, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, but for co-op, for our 7th and 8th graders, the New Hampshire SAS assessment that wasn't offered in the spring is mandatory this October. But on October 14th, the big concern is how are we going to manage the vast number of students in a physically distant environment to take an in-person paper and pencil test, have the appropriate number of proctors, and do so co-op-wide. And the only way to do that was to utilize all faculty and staff and to create a like a Google Classroom assignment for all of our 7th graders, 9th graders, and our 10th graders, and all of our 10th graders. The ones who opt not to take the test will have that whole day. The ones who opt to take the test will have to do so, complete the assignments, after school or after the assessment, as they typically would anyway when they would miss out on the school. And so we are asking that they not come to school because we physically cannot manage the number of people and the number of proctors that we need to have. So that'll look a little different this year on October 14th, but we feel that with only those completing an assessment present in the building, we can manage with the number of proctors.
What did you say, the seniors options, are they allowed to take the SAT?
They are required to. It's the state
Seniors
assessment.
are?
Because they missed it, and it was supposed to be.
So juniors have to take it and seniors
So
have to take it?
seniors in the fall on October 14th have to take the SAT
Yep.
to count as their last spring's grade 11.
So the juniors don't have the option of taking the SAT
The
this time?
juniors need to take the PSAT in October, and then in the springtime,
Right.
they'll take what will become the online SAT school day administration.
Right, so they don't have the option of taking the
The
fall.
SAT not in the fall, no. They can choose to do so at a test center on a
Yeah.
Saturday, but not the school day assessment.
And the junior PSAT is required for 8th, optional for 7th?
PSAT 8-9, we pay for that for 8th grade. We don't offer that
Oh,
for
so it's
7th
only
grade.
8th?
Correct.
Okay.
So it's really 7th and 9th that don't have an assessment, along with, I'm not sure your numbers on PSAT for 10th graders usually.
Tends to be around 60, but it's gone up. Now we allow them to pay for it, and especially since we're going to have full, enough proctors, it could easily see 80.
Okay. So a little under less than half of the class will be taking the test. Maybe, I don't know, call it 60%, a little bit more maybe, would not have anything in school that day, other than a Google Classroom assignment.
So 8th, junior and senior mandatory.
8th, junior and senior mandatory, yep.
And are you giving sophomores option on
The sophomores paid for it last spring, I believe, because we have to order them ahead of time.
are you going to give them the option this time?
So
for
we
the
gave them
PSAT?
They already had.
They already had the option last
They already
spring
paid
to
and
pay
opted
to
into
take
it.
it this October.
Oh, okay, so that's already taking place.
Yes.
Do you have is there a significant quantity?
He said 60.
60 to 80.
Tends to be around 60.
Okay, out of how many?
About 200.
So it's about a third.
Sometimes we did
No, I'm
offer
just trying to figure out how loaded the school's gonna be.
How what?
How loaded the school.
Loaded? Looking at the proportions, actually a little bit lower than what we typically have in person. The difference is arranging them in the space that is acceptable for proctoring, because there are certain requirements that we have for.
So are you anticipating starting with the big spaces?
I believe we are planning to do the SAT in the larger space and the PSAT in the individual classrooms. But Amanda and I haven't finalized that.
So what do you need approval from the board to basically, you're basically saying that 7th graders, 9th graders, and 60% of 10th graders will not be attending school on October
that day.
14th. They will not be walking into school buildings. And they also will not be able to Zoom into school because their
Correct.
teachers are going to be proctoring exams.
Right.
So instead, they will be given an assignment to do at home, a Google Classroom assignment.
Yes.
So do you need a motion from the board to prove that, or do you just do it? Do you just need like a?
I don't think we need to do
We
that.
don't need to do that.
My thought process is that it has to happen because these are mandatory state testing. And I need to fulfill the guidelines for COVID, for safety measures.
Yep.
So we would be
We
moving
can't
forward.
vote no. We can't, right, we
no.
don't have a choice.
Holly, I have just one quick question about that, because you said it's mandatory for these age group, or these grades, and it's for in-person and remote. For remote families, it's mandatory, but it's mandatory for them to come in.
Correct.
And has that, are they aware of that, and is there something in place for if they refuse to? Because some it's very, very.
So-
It's not mandatory for them to take the test, though. They can, it's still the opt-out, right?
There's
Right,
always
that's
the
what I wanted
opt-out.
I just want to
And so that will be
highlight.
part of the communication.
Yep.
But until we
But
have
we
this
have to-
conversation.
It's mandatory that we hold,
I
that
do,
they.
yep, I just want to make that
Right.
clear.
It's a
Thank
little
you.
bit different this year with that SAT makeup. It's actually not for accountability purposes for our 12th graders that were 11th grade in the spring. So
Well, that's under discussion, but I think we want to make sure it's offered to give everyone an
we are
equitable
mandated
access.
to offer it, absolutely. Yeah.
There is some discussion as to the backward intent of making sure that we have the participation. But at the end of the day, it is an SAT. Many feel that it's valuable to take, especially if they hadn't taken it, independently. So I'm excited that they're going to have that opportunity. Many were disappointed that for a lot of reasons with COVID, that a lot of things were kind of taken away, and we don't want to take away this opportunity.
Is
but
it state funded?
It is state funded, yeah.
Okay.
The big piece was that we wanted to make sure the board was aware, because Rick's going to need to start putting this in his newsletter and sending out the information, and didn't want you to have somebody call you or question you, and what are you talking about? So that's the way we'll proceed forward. We'll have 7th and 9th grade, we'll have Google Classroom assignments, and that way it will also count as a school day for everybody involved.
Just a quick question, do you normally, like when you do the SAT, when we don't have COVID in March, are the proctors normally faculty members? Or are they usually, like, teachers, or are they usually like guidance counselor, like?
All of the above.
So that's the all-day SAT is like, okay.
The difference is we can pack them in closer.
Right, no, I understand, I completely get why we need to
And
have all
depending on
hands
which
deck.
assessment they're going to be completing, there's required training
Right.
that we need to provide.
Right, I
So,
gotcha, I understand,
Did
I
they,
used to do it.
did they eliminate the third part of the test this
Yes.
year?
the essay for the school day administration, Rick, I don't remember. Do you know if there was discussion of it, then it was optional, then it was mandatory? To be honest,
I was just
I
curious.
don't recall. It seems like it switches back and forth every year, and then we always debate about whether we're going to offer it anyways.
I believe it's mandatory.
Okay, and just to clarify, if you paid for the PSAT and you're remote and you don't feel comfortable, certainly it's an option. We can't refund you, but it's an option. And then for our 8th grade PSAT, or PSAT 8-9, that is a local assessment. It is not a state assessment. So if you are a remote student and would rather not come in, then there's nothing, it's not a requirement. But it is something that helps drives our instruction, so we would certainly like to.
Just real quick, will there be assignments in place for those students who choose to opt out of any of these tests?
Yes, we are required to.
Okay, thank you so much for the update on that. Okay, at this point, we're gonna move into deliberations. We have 2 pieces that we need to deliberate on, which we usually do in April, and we're doing them now. The first is to see what action the board will take regarding policy BCA, which is board member code of ethics. Policy BCA states in part, quote, "The school board will review and vote to adhere to the following board member code of ethics at the board organizational meeting each year." I would like to have a motion to, I need a motion that the board approve by roll call and state agreement to adhere to the policy BCA board member code of ethics.
So moved.
Moved by Tom, seconded by Beth, sorry, thank you. And just, is there any discussion on this? This is something that we do every year. Okay, so I need a roll call vote. I'll start with you, Krista.
Krista, aye.
Holly, aye.
Tom, I.
Beth, aye.
Kate, aye.
Kate, aye. So that's 5-0. That's carried. And then similarly, we need to see what action the board will take regarding policy DFA investment. Note RSA 193:23-A Part 4 reads in part, at least yearly, the school board shall review and adopt an investment policy for the investment of public funds in conformance with the provisions of applicable statutes. And the state requires the policy be reviewed on a yearly basis.
So moved.
Okay, so I need a motion to adopt policy DFA investment. So moved by Tom,
Second.
seconded by Beth. Again, is there any discussion?
I
Okay.
was just one question. Are we doing any investment of, do we have any?
No, not at this time.
Okay, so this is not a roll call, so all in favor? 5-0. Okay, so that is the end of that portion of the agenda. HB highlights, this is just a time
Can I
for,
just ask one
yes,
question?
sure.
Does any of this carry over to HB Elevates, or are they completely independent of this policy?
Completely independent.
Thank you.
So HB highlights, just an opportunity if board members have seen, we can't really go to the school right now. I do have to say, I thought the open house, minus the glitch, at the high school was incredibly well done, and I felt like the staff members did a great job explaining what is going on in their schools, and I was very, very impressed with what I went through as a parent. I said I wish every board member could have at least been a fly on the Zoom wall to see that. I do have to say that many of my friends felt that the Zoom virtual open house was a great thing. So are there any other highlights or comments at this point?
I'll just say a couple things. I've had the opportunity to be present at both the campuses in the first week, and it's been a very, very positive, exciting experience to see the staff, the students. I know Krista had asked before too about kind of the environment, but there are a little bit of reservations here and there, but really overall excitement. So it's been really nice to see that. But one thing I just want to point out, on the very first day, I don't usually single things out or single people out, but on the very first day up at the high school, it definitely caught my attention seeing an administrator out there kind of, I guess the only other word is herding students from one field to another, and everybody was, following along, and, it was definitely a sight to see, so it caught attention. And this particular administrator kind of caught my attention, caught my eyes and said, well, we thought this would work. It's not working. So we're going to try something different. I think this is going to work. And that made my day, and it really set a tone where that has been the experience for the last 6 months for most people who have been working and involved in that, and that's just an awesome mentality, and I really, really appreciate that. And I've seen that on both campuses, but that was a very obvious big, just wasn't working, so we're going to try something different. But I just want to say I really appreciate that mentality that I've seen at both the campuses, and that's really, and I definitely like the open house too. That was wonderfully done. I didn't quite get to hear the first part because I was one of the over 100, but other than that, it was amazing. So.
And the videos that you both put together were very helpful.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so report out from the process observer.
Most everything, here and there, little. Yeah, we're really very on time. A couple of things, specifically discussions needed a little bit of extra time, but we quickly made that up in deliberations. But other than that, everything really ran pretty on time.
Great, thank you. And do we have a non-public?
We do not.
Okay, so at this point, we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Tom, seconded by Beth, all in favor. Okay, great, thank you, and we have a non-meeting.
We have a non-meeting, so if we can shut down, folks, and Linda, Tim, and Rick, have a great night.
Thank you. You're purple, it's November 18th.
I'm just wondering why this was passed out. Was there something new on it?
Because there was an issue with, because the 23rd is really not a school day now. It's like, it's a remote day, so having a meeting with the business, so we're moved to the 16th, and that's actually perfect. It's us, and aren't we the 16th? Oh no, we're the 16th, right?
For which day? Which one?
November 16th, right? Aren't we the 16th?